Hello, healthy people, and welcome back to the Organelle podcast. Today we're exploring pathology as a means to health excellence. We'll navigate through what exactly pathology is, the crucial role it plays, and the challenges, mental and physical, that may arise. As always, I'm Xavior Greenhalgh, and we'll be joined by the Organelle digital health platform's leading practitioner, Lionel Godwin. So, without further ado, let's all take the next step on our health journeys. Hello again, Lionel.
Xavier, good to see you. How are you?
Fantastic as usual. So, Lionel, we have an exciting one today. Today, we're talking about a fundamental concept that's involved with organelle and with health in general, and that is pathology. Now, that can be a big and scary word to a lot of people who don't really understand what it means and just see these demonic images of needles and blood. So, Lionel, why don't you take us off with just a really brief definition of what is pathology?
I'm actually going to do it a different way, Xavier, with your permission. I'm going to reference, um, if anybody who's listened to our podcast previously, they would have heard me say on numerous occasions that our blood never lies. Now, I'm going to read a paragraph from a book by James B. Lavelle, who's one of the world's leading hematologists, and he writes some very, very good books on blood. He's a guy that I reference a lot. And I'm going to read a preface from a book of his, Your Bloods Don't Lie. So, with your permission, I'll get into that. Here we go.
Please?
Today, more and more people are taking an interest in their health and becoming active participants in guiding their healthcare. Our present health, as well as its future, relies in large part on self-directed care. After all, who is more invested in your health than you? In fact, personalized medicine in the United States is predicted to exceed 300 billion over the next 5 years. A blood test is one of the best methods of self-care available today. Routine blood testing can provide an accurate picture of not only your current health, but also your future. Even if you eat right, exercise, and eliminate bad habits, you may have an underlying medical condition, nutritional deficiency, or hormone imbalance that only a blood test can detect. As the title of this book asserts, your blood never lies. So for me, in answer to your question, pathology is the capacity to monitor your current, previous, and future health and well-being via the biomarkers that we get from our pathology.
Yeah, so just to lay it out in how it works in my head, because I'm a layman here. Pathology is really just about blood tests, and what blood tests are is it gives us a way to numerically measure your health via the most integral part of your body, which is your blood. Does that sum it up nicely enough, Lionel?
It does. And importantly, and as James says in his book, it allows us, our bloods allow us to become active participants in our journey of health and wellness, right? That for me is the key component of pathology. Pathology allows us to become, you know, our own active participants. And that's for me is the value of pathology.
Yeah, it really does put a lot of power in your hand. Someone who doesn't have any pathology involved in their health journey is just going to be trying to, like, I don't know, they've got a goal that I want to improve how I feel. I'd like to feel better. But
Mm,
what is that? How do you measure that? How do you know if you're really making progress? How do you know if it's A, B, or C?
mm.
Whereas if you have pathology and you get some result, and you're like, hey, I would like my testosterone score to increase from X to Y. And you get one blood test and then another one 3 months later, and you're like, oh, it went up by this much. I know it did because I had these strategies I was implementing specifically to target that testosterone biomarker.
Yeah.
It gives you so much ability. I have a nice graph on the wall here, but it's essentially that if you talk about energy that you're applying to achieve some kind of goal, if you don't have any way to measure how you're actually implementing that energy, it just kind of goes in every direction a little way. But if you have something to focus that energy around, like a specific numeric result, you can put it all in one direction, and that's going to make it go way further, give you way better results.
Absolutely. And then you can understand whether what you're doing to try and achieve that result is actually working or not. Because again, the biomarkers in your blood will tell you whether the steps that you've taken are working. So that active participation is measured.
Okay, I think we've laid out in detail enough there what pathology is, kind of why it's really important for the health journey, and why indeed it's an absolute foundational pillar of the organelle experience. But there's still going to be a lot of people, Lionel, who, whether they want to admit it or not, just don't want to do it because it's kind of scary. It's a little invasive to have someone jab you with a needle and take a few vials of blood. What would you say to those people?
Find a way, one, of overcoming any fears you may have. The beauty of the advances in pathology at the moment is that they only put one needle in and they can take as many vials of blood as they like. They only have to prick you once. So that's the first thing. Understand that for a millisecond of discomfort, and these needles are so fine that they use for pathology that you barely even notice them going in. I regularly watch needles go into my arm when I get my bloods done regularly. And honestly, you just don't feel it. Well, I certainly don't. You know, I, but I also overcome any reticence I might have around getting a needle because I know the value of the information that I'm going to get back from suffering that millisecond of pain. The value that I'm going to get from the information that I receive from the vials of blood that they take far outweigh any negative connotations around getting a needle. So for me, that's one of the things that I talk to people about most often when they tell me, "Oh, I hate needles," is that listen, you're going to be jumping out of your skin with the amount of information that we're going to give you that's going to help you on your journey. And that for most is enough to allow them to overcome their fears. Not all. I still have those that are very, very reluctant, but it's very, very, very short term pain for extraordinarily long term gain.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm not a porcupine like yourselves who likes to watch them stab me, but I'd gotten almost no needles shoved in me until I started working for Organelle,
Yeah.
started getting my blood work done consistently. And I've seen amazing results with that, but I'm just going to say to everyone, it's going to be uncomfortable the first time, but just look away. It takes 3 seconds and you're done
Yeah.
and dusted. You're ready
And
to
it's, I
move
mean,
on your health journey.
yeah, and as I said, the needles are so fine these days. You virtually don't even know that they've gone in. And
Hmm.
most pathology clinics have such experienced nurses in there that they are experts at what they do, so they can minimise any discomfort.
There we go. Where did pathology come from, Lionel? How recent an invention is this kind of blood analysis in terms of the history of health?
Oh, look, it goes back. It's not a question that I can answer definitively. In that it's people have looked at bloods and for decades, generations. Um, in a medical sense, in terms of using it as a medical sense, it's been around for at least 150 years. In terms of understanding bloods, the understanding and the blood tests they did way back then was so rudimentary and so ineffective that they weren't really valuable. But large amounts of money and effort were put into understanding bloods and blood works because there was a very early recognition of the fact that bloods told most of the stories that we needed to be aware of within our bodies. So, in a medical sense, definitely in the last 150 years, it's been at the coalface or the forefront, of uh, helping medical practitioners give advice. But the use of bloods goes back way beyond that. There are certain measurements taken with bloods in, again, a very rudimentary way that go back hundreds of years.
Well, I'll be.
Uh,
Okay, so this stuff is a technology that's been around for a long time, albeit not really effective until the last few decades.
yeah,
It's really important for your health, and it's absolutely foundational to what we do at Organelle. But some people get a little confused, I feel, when they hear the term blood test, and they think it's just purely about your blood. But what I've come to discover, because that's what I believed at first, is that through this blood test, we can basically get an accurate read on every single organ in the human body. Why is that, Lionel? Why can just from a little bit of blood out of my arm, you can tell how well my lung or my kidney is functioning?
Because of what blood represents. Blood represents all of the conditions within your body, past, uh, present, and future. And depending on the type of blood tests that you do, they all relate either synergistically or individually to organs or functions within the body. So there are so, and you'll see in anybody who visits the Organelle site and looks at the blood works that we get done, there are literally 2.5 to 3,000 different types of blood tests that we can do, all of which provide an accurate representation of what's happening within the body. They different. I won't go into the technological terms because we're talking about neutrophils and monocytes and lymphocytes and hemoglobin and all of the different blood cells that we have. It's going to be too confusing for people. But just understand that the bloods, as the preface from the book that I read earlier, our blood never lies, and every single aspect of our blood tells a story of what's going on within the body.
Yeah, so they really are just like the most powerful health measurement you can get done.
They are a
What are
powerful health
some of the
measurement.
other types of, what are the alternatives here? What, well, not alternatives, but what else could you do to try and measure your health other than sheer pathology? What other things do we
So then,
test to get
obviously,
numeric results from?
there's the X-rays that we get. So whether they be
Mm,
just a straight X-ray or a CT scan or an MRI or a PET scan, there's tissue sampling. We can test people's tissue to get a very accurate read on what's going on. We test people's bone marrow. We there are so many measurements. We can test people's lung capacity by just blowing into the name escapes me, but there's so many little tests that we can do that are indicative of something that's going on.
mm,
Ultimately, though, whenever so a practitioner has done a test that is not a pathology test through X-rays and whatever, they will always go back and get a blood test done to confirm
mm,
or provide other areas of investigation because of what the blood works tell them. So I use myself as an example. I don't like to use myself as an example, but a few years ago, I had pulmonary embolisms in my lungs. I believe they came as a consequence of the COVID vaccinations, and I'm not an anti-vaxxer or anything like that. I had all of my COVID vaccinations because I believed it was important to create a herd immunity. But I did get pulmonary embolisms as a consequence of that. As part of my blood testing that I had done, the pulmonary embolism showed up in a CT scan. So then they decided to run
mm,
some blood works, and just purely coincidentally, one of the doctors who was treating
mm,
me asked for an ESR test, which is an erythrocyte sedimentation rate test. And it's a test that relates to inflammation in the body and other things. As a consequence of that test and some of the results that he saw in that test, particularly how far out of the range I was, he ordered a bone marrow test. And he discovered that I had what he thought at the time was a multiple myeloma, which is where the paraprotein in my bones leach out and make my bones weak. And ultimately, it's like a form of leukemia. Um,
mm,
we found out with further blood tests and the bone marrow test that it wasn't actually a full-blown multiple myeloma. It was what's known as a smoldering myeloma, so a precursor to a full-on multiple myeloma. So I'm now being treated for that. Every 2 months, I go and get an injection that helps stop this smoldering myeloma from becoming a multiple myeloma. The point that I'm making is that without that blood test, they would never have looked at other forms of investigation to see what might have been causing that ESR test to be so high. So, for me, that is the absolute value of bloods. It was able to lead them down a pathway that ultimately has stopped me from, dying, I suggest, from a blood type illness. So, it's really essential that we understand just how important pathology is in determining our health and wellness.
Yeah, it's that goes a long way to show, and it's a brilliant story. Thank you for sharing
Yeah.
that. The
Uh,
first place that some kind of problem in your body is going to show up is in your bloods,
It
right? That's
is.
why it's just absolutely imperative that you get regular blood work done.
I had no idea. I'm a very fit, healthy 63-year-old who works 12, 14 hours a day, trains every day. I had no inkling that I was actually on the verge of a serious illness. There's no cure for multiple myeloma. So, I was on the verge of going or getting a full blown multiple myeloma if it wasn't for pathology. So, it's effectively saved my life.
Just to help others kind of try and benefit from that, how often, I suppose there's different answers for different age ranges, but how often would you recommend that people get blood
I
work done?
personally, because of the way our red blood cells get exchanged in our body, I like to do bloods every 120 days. To me, it's no
Mm.
different to me servicing my car every 10,000 kilometers. Every 120 days, I get a full blood sweep done. So that I've got one, not only the reference point, but also the opportunity to intervene if and whenever I need to.
Right, so that'd be about 3 times a year, every
Three
four
times a
months or
year.
so.
Yeah, every 4 months. Yep. And
And
it's
you
like,
wouldn't reduce that at all for younger people like me?
oh, look, I think the benefit of being a young person doing it 120 days is imagine the amount of reference data you will be able to
Mm,
put together over the next 60, 70 years, not only for your own benefit, but for research.
mm,
One of the great things that I did
mm,
with my diagnosis is I agreed to become a research patient so that they can, collect all of my data that they collected, use it for research and stuff like that. Now, for someone in their early 20s who has a bent towards um, living as good and as prosperous and as healthy a life as they can, I would love to start every 20-year-old on a 120-day cycle of blood tests because it just, anything that changes, you're going to immediately be on top of it. Every 120 days,
mm.
you're going to know something's gone out or something's going to become life threatening or life changing. You're going to be able to react to it so quickly that, to me, we spoke in a podcast previously about where's the future of health. The future for health for me, and I didn't talk about it then, is having these reference points, these continual reference points, this data collation. For me, that's where the future of health is. We want to talk about predictive and preventable medicine, which I think is largely what Organelle is about. Then having that data, and the longer we have that data, the more likely we are to be predictive or preventative.
Damn. There you go. You got to start this stuff early. It's going to
Absolutely.
bulletproof your longevity, your health, your quality of life.
Well, to allow you to
Okay,
be, well, to go back to James Flavell, it will allow you to become the best active participant you could possibly be in your own
that
health and
sounds like
wellness.
something worth becoming.
It
Okay,
is.
I think we've summed this up beautifully. If anyone listening has been interested by anything we've had to say, would like to find out more about us or Organelle, the company we work for, you can go to organelle.com.au. That's organelle.com.au. Thank you, Lionel, for another
Pleasure,
fantastic
Rosa.
episode.
All right, take care.